Modern day top flight hot hatchbacks tend to have three things in common these days. They're all very powerful, most of them have all-wheel drive, and let's be honest, they're reasonably easy to drive also. This is the Honda Civic Type R FK2, and it's a car that demands the blood, sweat and tears of its driver. So here we are then, the Honda Civic Type R FK2, a pretty rare car by today's standards. Certainly rarer than the FK8 that replaced it, which then went on to be sold in America, which boosted its sales and appeal enormously. Now this car's rare for two quite considerable reasons. Firstly, its incredibly polarising looks. It's one of those cars that people will either go out of their way to take a picture of, or go out of their way to tell you what an eyesore it is parked on their street. It's insane. It's the sort of car that Batman would drive on his day off, with its aggressive front splitter, enormous rear wing and swollen arches to cover the widened front track. The visuals are very much Marmite, and they were inspired by the very successful World Touring car which is based upon this model. So the looks certainly had some buyers scratching their heads. Secondly, this launched at roughly the same time as the Ford Focus RS, the third generation with all-wheel drive and plenty of power. Now, whilst this car has been proven to lap tracks faster than a Ford Focus RS, in the pub game of top trumps where you're comparing 0 to 60s and how much output the engine actually has, the Type R doesn't come off quite as well. In that regard, lots of people went for the RS, more to save face than anything. Now the key reason this car's not as quick as a Focus RS in a dead straight line is because it's front wheel drive. It's powered by a 2-litre turbocharged VTEC engine with around 306 horsepower. It'll get from 0 to 62 miles per hour in a very respectable 5.7 seconds, but its top speed is actually mighty impressive in its own right, 167 miles per hour. Not bad for something you can put the kids in the back and go shopping in. Now, to the uninitiated, a hot hatchback with front-wheel drive seems like a huge disadvantage over an all-wheel drive car like the Golf R or the Focus RS. But in truth, it saves a hell of a lot of weight for this car, and whilst it doesn't launch quite as aggressively, it makes up for it through the bends. From a purist perspective, there's another benefit to that as well, in that there isn't a clever all-wheel drive system doing all of the work for you. In a Focus RS, whilst really impressive and super engaging and just one of the best hot hatchbacks of its generation, this being one of the last of the hard-nosed front-wheel drive gen, it feels purer somehow. I'm doing the work here, I'm the one nailing that apex, I'm the one who potentially puts it in a ditch. I've always explained it a bit like, my mum could happily drive a Ford Focus RS daily. My mum would crash a Civic Type R. Why shouldn't a car make you work for its performance? I mean, isn't that what that whole man-machine connection thing's all about? This car's mighty impressive when left to its own devices, but when you push this plus R button down here and the dashboard goes red to signify something interesting happening, you'll find that it absolutely opens the taps on the performance available. The throttle response increases, giving you much more torque scrambling out of the corners. The steering sharpens up quite significantly. The suspension has stiffened, the dampers now in their hardest Nürburgring record-setting setup. And it's just incredible. I mean, before you know it, you are doing some quite tremendous speeds. And out here on these challenging country British roads, it's in its element. I'm loving this. I feel so plugged into what's going on. With that turbo gushing and whooshing under pressure, sounding like Darth Vader with hay fever, this whole package comes alive. It's a real pleasure to drive hard, and that's where it's enjoyed most. Around town it rides quite hard, maybe the driving position's a bit too high if we're being critical of the car. As a hot hatchback that maybe even scares you a little at times, it scores very highly. But the stars of the show are those drilled and ventilated disc brakes from Brembo. I mean, not only do they provide ample stopping power for this car, but the pedal is so easy to modulate that you can really use the weight transfer under braking to your advantage. Tip it in on the brakes into a corner, that weight shifts forward, the back end goes light, and all of a sudden you can pivot the car around your hips. It's this sort of agility that having the added weight of an all-wheel drive system sort of robs you of. And it's the reason that this car is just so communicative, so engaging with the driver through a bend. A few years ago when this car was brand new, I set up a test to find out how accurate and intuitive the handling of the car really was by setting up a load of paint balls right on the apex of a tight bend. And this car absolutely annihilated them in gratuitous slow motion. This car isn't pick up and play, and you really do need to understand the physics of driving to get the most out of it. But if you venture onto a track with this car, which I strongly encourage you do, I've been lucky enough to drive it on the Slovakia ring, the Formula 1 Hungary ring and the Nürburgring. That is where this car really unleashes itself. That's where that sticky continental rubber comes into its own. And that is where this car absolutely shames its all-wheel drive competition in terms of just how quick it is. To my mind, this FK2 is one of the last in the bloodline of hardcore front-wheel drive hot hatchbacks, the old school recipe if you like. And with things going forward being more electronically controlled and removing the driver from the situation, it's wonderfully refreshing to drive a vehicle that demands the driver's in the driver's seat in order for it to function. It's not doing it for you. And that is the key to this car. Hot hatchbacks have always been the rebellious vote, the machine that doesn't really give a damn what you or your neighbours think. It's the car that shames your boss's sports car at half the price with equivalent performance. I love these things for being the rebel of the automotive world. And the Type R, this one, it might just be the most rebellious of the bunch.
Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments below. Please subscribe for all of the latest and greatest cars to hit the road. For breaking news and written reviews, visit www.insidelane.co.uk.